Hey guys, Richard Holden right here. I'm going live. We're going to talk about big block Chevy heads today. And I wanted to do this before I headed down to West Tech to start all the dyno testing because I'm heading down there and right after, basically right after I get off. I want to talk to you about a test I did on big block Chevy heads. And unfortunately, I've not loaded up the software that I need to do split screens and stuff. And we're doing that. But I want to get this video up. And we're going to talk about iron big block Chevy heads. For a long time, obviously when they first came out, there were basically no aluminum heads. And yes, I know there were L88 heads and ZL1 heads and the L89 head option, but basically aluminum heads for big block Chevys back in the day were few and far between. So everybody that was out doing performance stuff with big block Chevys, they were doing it with iron big block Chevy heads. And there's a ton of power to be had from these iron heads. I mean, just take a look at all the guys that have done porting on them and stuff. They've done some amazing things. They make lots of power. So I wanted to do a test. And because whenever we do dyno tests, I've done, you can take a look at some of the other videos. As a matter of fact, I want to mention that if you are a big block Chevy guy and you like big block Chevys, I have two playlists for big block Chevys up. One are the naturally aspirated stuff. I have things dedicated to all the naturally aspirated testing, including stroker stuff, which this one will go in. But I also have one on turbocharging, supercharging, and nitrous oxide, so all the power hour stuff. So check out those playlists if you are a big block Chevy guy, because there's a lot of cool tests up there. And every time I load one, it goes into those playlists. So if you're looking for big block Chevy stuff, it's there. If you're looking for LS stuff or small block Chevy stuff or anything else, there is a playlist dedicated to that stuff. So I want to talk about big block Chevy iron head because there's a lot of power to be had. And I did a test, and I think that this video is up where we tested a ton of different big block Chevy heads. And obviously most of them are aluminum, but there are some things that aluminum, there are some reasons that guys don't want to choose an aluminum head. And one is basically because of cost. I mean, aluminum head is almost always going to be more expensive than, hey guys, got a 781, 718. The heads I'm testing today are 088, so we'll get into that in just a minute. But I wanted obviously the aluminum heads are more expensive. So if you're going to buy heads, you know, there's a cost associated with that. There are a lot of good iron heads out there, and the heads that I'm testing today came from Summit Racing. And that's why I wanted to do this test, because basically this is a kind of a low buck iron head test. Because if you take if I go like what I do, we go to the wrecking yard and pick up a big block Chevy, or if you already have one and you have to go through your heads. Let's say you got to put valves in them, you got to put springs in them, you got to do a valve job, maybe you're going to surface them, you're going to rebuild the heads. There's going to be some expense associated with that. So you have to think, well, should I do that and have these heads back to what they were, depending on what iron heads you have? You can have an oval port or rec port. There's a lot of different choices from the factory stuff. But should I maybe just step up and buy a set of iron heads? So that's always a consideration. Maybe it's a little bit more to buy the iron heads. In the case of our Summit heads, they're about $800, which is a lot cheaper, obviously, than their aluminum counterpart. But it might be a little more expensive than rebuilding heads. So that's something you guys have to look at. But the other thing is, when you rebuild your iron heads, let's say, and unless you go through and do a bunch of porting to them, and you can do that yourself, which is fantastic. If you're just rebuilding, you're having your iron heads rebuilt, you're going to end up with the factory iron head, which is, you know, which has a certain amount of performance. And as we'll see, it's not nearly what a set of aftermarket heads, or at least not with these Summit heads. And I'm sure somebody out there knows, and you guys let me know if you do. Let me know if you know who does the heads for Summit. I'm sure that it's somebody like Dart or somebody, because they usually farm that stuff out. But as it turned out, these heads worked out fairly well. So what I need to do now is I need to show you guys what the test engine was, because obviously that makes a difference. If we test it on a stock 396, you're not going to see that big of a difference. If we test it on a 572-inch stroker, we're going to have a bigger difference. But the engine that we tested this on was a 496. So what I'm going to have to do now, because I don't have the split screen, I'm actually going to have to physically grab my camera. I'm going to turn it around and aim it at the screen. I'm going to go old school on this. Might as well be an 8-track tape, but I'll aim it at it, and we'll go over. I can still talk about all of the parts that were on the motor, all the stuff that we use. We'll go over the test motor, and then we'll go over the specs on the two heads and the dyno results. So let's take a look. So I'm going to reach up. I'm going to grab this. You guys won't be able to see me anymore, because nobody really wants to watch me anymore anyway. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to put you up on my stand here. Oh, yeah, we got all kinds of crazy stuff going on there. So let's bring up our okay, so now everybody should be able to see that, right? Can you see that? I'm thinking that's not working. Oh, maybe it is. Maybe you guys can still see it. Okay, guys, let me know in the comments if you can see this. Can you guys see those photos? Okay, so apparently you guys can see it. So now what we have is a 496 big block Chevy. This is a Gen 4 4-bolt, or Gen 4. It's a Mark 4 4-bolt block. It was a, we bored it out to 4310, and obviously we stuck a 4250 stroker crank in it. It's got forged rods in it. You know, we put forged internals in it just so that it would handle the strength. This thing we ended up doing a lot of stuff with it. It made good power. It had a Mylodon oiling system on it, windage tray, obviously in the pickup, so that we didn't have any oiling issues with the big block. We had obviously this was 60 over. We put this was like a 20cc dome piston in it. So the compression was in the mid 10s on our combinations with these typical 120cc heads. These were from Probe Racing. The camshaft that I installed in it was one of my favorite big block cams, because since I like to run nitrous and boost and turbos and blowers and everything usually on these things, in addition to running them NA, I put a comp 300 BR-14, which is a 652 lift, 255, 262 degree duration, and 114 degree lobe separation angle. So it's kind of, as far as cams go, it's what I would call a medium sized cam. It's not a really big one. You could put a 270, 280 degree at 50 camshaft in it, and it'll rev up and make lots of power. But this one's a good kind of medium sized camshaft. Obviously comp, this is a solid roller cam, and they also supplied this the double roller timing chain and the cam button so that it would locate the camshaft, because this was obviously not a roller block. They also had the crane supplied our solid roller lifters, and then we got obviously the right leg push rods and stuff. So the first thing we did, this thing obviously had head studs on it and Felpro head gaskets. We installed a set of 088 factory iron rec port heads. They had a 219 188 valve package. When we measured the ports on them, they measured 316 cc's on the intake and 121 cc's on the exhaust. The chamber size was, we measured the chamber volume also at 123 cc's. We also airflow tested these things, and they flowed, the best peak flow that we got was 335 CFM on the intake and 201 CFM on the exhaust. This thing was also equipped with these Crane 1.7 aluminum roller rockers, and we made sure that we had enough valve spring to go with, obviously, a dual valve spring to go with our camshaft. We ran this thing with an Edelbrock 454R, a rec port Victor Jr. intake, basically, and a Holley 950. And obviously, we ran them both on the dyno, run with it, and I'll bring up the graphs in just a second, but our when we ran this thing on the dyno with the 088 heads, this thing made 630 horsepower at 6,600 and 577 foot-pounds at 5,300. And we obviously had our dyno long tube headers on it, so you can see in here we've got our probes for the EGTs and stuff. It had an MSD distributor. We always run it with the Mazier electric water pump. It had a 2-piece front cover on it. It's kind of some fancy stuff. Then we grabbed our Summit Racing heads. We had to do a valve spring upgrade on those as well, because they come set up for like a 650 lift cam, and that was kind of right on the borderline for us. And since we were running a roller, we wanted to put more valve spring in it. The Summit heads had 308 cc intake ports, 121 cc exhaust ports. They had 121 cc combustion chambers. And these had bigger valves in them. These had a 2250 188 valve package, and they didn't flow a ton more. The peak flow was 340 CFM and 246 CFM on the exhaust. So it had quite a bit more exhaust flow. it had a little bit more intake flow. But one thing that the Summit head had compared to the 088 heads, it had about 20 CFM through better through most of the midlift ranges. So it had a lot more midlift and a lot more exhaust flow, which is what we think obviously combined to contribute the better power output that this thing produced. Obviously, we put the Summit heads on with the same rockers and stuff, and then we ran it on the dyno with the same intake, the same carburetor, even though this one's got an XP on it, but we did run it with the same carburetor and the same headers and everything. This was these are photos from 2 different tests. One of them is when we ran this head on the big head test, and one of them was when we ran this head by itself. So, but let's take a look at the dyno results now. So this is the power curve. So this is the power curve with the 088 heads. You can see this thing made 630 horsepower. It's got a nice flat torque curve. It's just kind of leveling off here at the top. And this is with the 088 head. You know, that's good power, 496. You know, 630 horsepower, 496. That's making 577 foot-pounds of torque. That's going to be pretty fun in a Camaro or Chevelle or a C10 truck or heck anything that you put it in. That's going to be pretty sporty. But here's what happened when we put the Summit heads on. It's kind of nice. I mean, that's basically more power everywhere. They made 688 horsepower at 6,600 and 607 foot-pounds. So it was up basically everywhere. It didn't lose anything down low, at least down at 3,500, kind of where we started this at. And we wouldn't expect it to lose any. It had the same compression. It had a slightly smaller intake port. It had a little bit bigger valve. So, you know, this thing just worked out. It picked up it picked up 38 horsepower and about 30 foot-pounds of torque at the peak. So this was a good combination. I mean, you know, that it just goes to show you that iron heads can still make good power as long as you pick the right one. So what I want from you guys, let me know. What do you guys think? Do you think you could take the stock ones and do some porting and do some milling, maybe do a valve upgrade and get them up to where these Summit heads are? I'm kind of thinking that you can. I've seen some pretty impressive stuff from guys out there modifying the factory heads. So let's get back to our discussion here so I can talk to you guys a little bit. There we go. So let's see what you guys have to say. My screen says I'm the only one watching because you're watching me. Is a tall deck 396 worth building? I don't know. I've seen some of the 366 and 427 tall deck stuff, but I don't know, unless you're building a really big motor, I don't know why you'd go to the tall deck, because the intake manifolds are kind of limited for that stuff. Let's see here. Yeah, 688 horsepower. It's whenever we get close to some big number. If, in this case, if we were close to 700 horsepower, we would want to try to get that and go after it. But since I actually did this test when we were doing a big cylinder head test, so we had a lot of head swapping to do. So we couldn't go out and eke every last little bit out of it. And 12 horsepower is a pretty big amount to get, especially since we had already kind of optimized the oiling system. You have to get the oil level just right on a big block, otherwise you can give up a lot of power. Put my my camera stand down here. 781s. I've never run 781s, although I've run a lot of 049 head tests. So if you look at the Big Block Chevy videos that are up, we did a set of 049 heads that were ported, and they're ported by Dr. J's, by Bryce over there back when he was doing it. And he did a pretty good job. They flowed really well. They performed well, and you can see them as a comparison to a lot of other more high dollar aluminum heads. And that stuff works pretty good. Lots of guys swear by the 049s, and a lot of guys have made lots of power with them, because I think that those 049 heads flowed at least as much as these heads did. So I think that they have a lot of potential also. How much difference does it make to open the chambers and unshroud the valves? It depends on valve sizing. If you go to a bigger valve, unshrouding the valve is always a good idea. We've done that on a lot of tests. I've done that on LS stuff and small block stuff. I don't remember ever testing big block heads to unshroud the chambers, but it's usually beneficial. I'd like to see what how that works on some of the big block stuff, especially when you go to a bigger valve and guys put a 2-300 or even bigger intake valves on some of this stuff. Obviously, having room around the chamber is always a good idea. An 063 head, a semi-open chamber. I'm actually not familiar with the 063 head. I know that I've never tested one. Otherwise, I would have remembered the casting designation. Let's see, no on the 366, but take the 4-bolt cabs and the steel crank. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Take the crank out and ditch the block and just put it in a standard block. The problem is with a lot of the Mark IV stuff is it gets harder and harder to find. And any early big block that we find in a wrecking yard is almost always going to be a 2-bolt Mark IV block. All the Gen 5 and Gen 6 stuff is all the big block stuff for the Gen 5 and Gen 6 is all 4-bolt main. So that's kind of like why we like to go with those. You can always convert the 2-bolt block, and I've got a setup from the guys at Mylodon we're going to do that with, and that's kind of cool. But still, we like the idea of the 4-bolt block, especially because we always put lots of power to it. I mean, almost everything that we get in a big block is going to go into 4 digits, because when we put the motor together, especially if we make a 496 like this, it's so easy to make 600 or 700 horsepower NA, and then all we have to do is add just a little bit of boost or nitrous or something, and then all of a sudden we're into the 1,000 horsepower range. So we like kind of starting with the 4-bolt block. 702 closed chamber heads. I haven't run a lot of closed chamber big block stuff. The problem with that is that, again, like finding a 4-bolt big block in the junkyard, finding a set of small chamber rec port heads, big block Chevy heads, is kind of hard. They're expensive. Guys want a lot of money for them because they're usually date casting stuff, and guys want those for putting together these ultra expensive high dollar numbers matching kind of rebuilds that they're doing. How much boost would be safe for a stock 454? Well, I don't know about a boost number. I usually don't relate it to that, because the amount of power that you make when you apply a certain amount of boost all depends on what you start with. If we apply boost on a 350 horsepower big block, it's not going to make very much power. But when we apply boost to this nearly 700 horsepower big block, you're talking about something that's going to make 1,400 horsepower at 1 atmosphere at 14.7 pounds. So I usually don't look at it in terms of boost. We look at it power, but we run 1,000 horsepower stuff on stock blocks all the time. So we know at least that's safe. The extreme energy solid roller stuff, we've run lots of it. The thing that I haven't done with solid roller stuff, and you guys might be able to answer this if you guys are actually out running them around. When we run them on the dyno, obviously they work fine. Everything works great because we're running them for such short time. I just don't know about running a solid roller and a solid roller lifter particularly. I think that the cam works fine, but the lifters for a long time. I don't know about the longevity of that on the street. So if you guys know, let me know. I just have not run one for a long period of time out on the street to find out how long they last. Obviously, we know that the hydraulic roller stuff works really well, and that lasts a long time. But I don't know about running a solid on the street for a long time. If it's something you're just taking to the drag strip on the weekends and stuff, or cruising around, it's probably fine. But I don't know about the kind of car that you would say, hey, look, I can take this across the United States and drive to New York if you wanted to drive to New York. Would you do that in a solid roller equipped, big block Chevelle or something? 496 big block towing on 87 octane. Yeah, if you have the compression right and you have the timing right and all that stuff, that shouldn't be a problem. Have you ever thought of doing a 2 of 4.2? I don't know what that is. A turbo on the 4.2, like the inline 6-cylinder? Because I'm definitely going to do that. We're definitely going to run that. I'm just figuring out how to tune it and what management system to use. There are some peanut port builds up. I use the peanut port actually as the start of the oval port head test that I did that is up. That video is up right now, so you can take a look at that. And we did the peanut port. I've done stuff that's in the 450 horsepower or so range on big block 454s with peanut ports. And you can port them, and judging by the flow rates, I think that there's guys out there making 500 horsepower with peanut ports. So there's definitely some potential there as long as you put the work into it. Yeah, 4.2 out of one of the Trailblazers. That's what I'm talking about. That 4.2 liter inline 6-cylinder motor is a good candidate. We call it the Ameribera, and that's what I want to do is we want to turbo the heck out of it. And I'm the live. I like the live stuff too because I like interacting with the people. I like hearing the questions, and I'm going to be doing a live thing. I think I'm going to try to do a live one every week so that I can sit down and talk with you guys and hopefully answer questions. And I'll have questions that hopefully you guys can answer because there's a lot of information out there. I don't have the answers to everything, and you guys can help me out too. But I want to let you guys know what's going on. I just rolled the Nova off of the trailer so I can take my trailer back, or take the trailer back to my buddy Troy. I'm also taking down the brake lathe. If you saw that video for my buddy Mark, I've got the Honda engine in the truck also. We're taking that down to get it ready to do the Big Bang K24 stuff. When I go down there, I'm going to run the Cadillac up on the dyno with the homemade turbo system that I have to build when I go down there. If I have time, I'm also going to try to maybe do some Buick testing. I don't know if the inline 6-cylinder will be ready, and I don't know if I have enough available dyno time to do all of that, but I'm definitely going to run the Cadillac. I might run the Buick. I am also going to try to at least start and make sure that the L99 4.3 liter baby LT1 V8 is a running motor. So I might get that up there as well. 496 088 castings, 630 horsepower, 250 plus 260 hydraulic roller cam. Oh, for people that missed the dyno results, I can show you the dyno results again if you want to look at if you guys want to look at the graphs. You have a ton of 430 and 455 parts. Nice. I've got a set for the 455 Buick. I now have 3 sets of heads. I have the stock ones. I have stage 1 head. Actually, I have 4 sets of heads. I have stock ones. I have stage 1 heads. I have aluminum Edelbrock heads, and I have aluminum TA heads that they loaned me. So we have some good stuff coming up for the Buick. A stock headed 400, a 400 big block or a 400 small block? I mean, I know it would be a 402 or a 396, but which 400 are you talking about? And if it's a small block, there's any number of really good heads out there for it. Yes, we have plans for the 300 inline 6-cylinder. I'm going to grab one of those, and I want to do testing with that, if only because I have really cool plans for the intake manifold. 7071 stage 1 heads. Yes, and the stage 1 heads basically are just a big valve version, I think, of the stock heads, is what the guys at TA told me. Big block Ford. I have some big block Ford stuff. I have a 429 for my buddy Mark Sanchez. He's got a 429 that's all stock, came from the wrecking yard. It's an early 68 or 69, I think. It might be a 70, but it's a high compression 429. And so we're going to run that on the dyno and do some cams and do some stuff. 400 horsepower possible with a 402 big block? Yeah, that's easily possible. 82 Cadillac, the 4.2 aluminum. I haven't tried. Is the 4.2 V8 in the 82 Cadillac, is that a North Star, or is that the later version? Line 44 choke, a small block 400. Yeah, 144 is kind of small for a 400-inch motor with 195s on it, because if you put a cam in that thing on a small block 400 with 195 airflow heads, it's going to make good power. And the 144 is just kind of small. I mean, it'll make boost down low, and it'll add more torque down there, but I think that ultimately it would choke the power potential. If you're wanting to know about the big bore 4.8 thing, just look up that video. You can see I give you the cam specs that we ran in that. We ran custom cams in that to run into 8,000. And the reason for the custom cams is not because there aren't cams that have the right duration to allow you to rev it that high, especially if you have cylinder head and stuff. but what you want is a very stable cam. And you can talk to the guys at Brown Tools Racing or Comp or any of the guys. You need to have stability to run it up in the 8,000 plus range. I know the LSX 427 twin turbo will make 1367 on 16 pounds of boost. So that means it makes 650 plus NA. Yeah, being at 144, running 12s, that's certainly doable, obviously. We need an LA 318 huge boost. Well, I think I'm not going to do an LA 318. That's way down the list. But I am going to do a Magnum. But it'll probably be a 360 because I think more guys would, if you're going to get a wrecking yard motor, if you're going to get a Magnum, you probably would pick the 360 over the 318 just because bigger is better and it makes more power. The 4.3 V6 and a 99 Astro and L35. I'm not up on the designations for the 4.6s. I'd have to go look it up, but that stuff's obviously available on the internet to find out when that designation came out. I like the little 4.3 liter V6s. I want to do some more testing with them. And if you guys haven't taken a look at the comparison between the two, the 4.3 liter V6 and the 4.3 liter V8, they both make 200 horsepower. So it's kind of an interesting comparison. Now I'm really excited about running that L99 4.3 liter V8 because I had a viewer reach out to me and say, hey, I have a carbureted intake for that LT1 that you can borrow. And so I'm going to probably pick that up on my way down and use it. And just in case we can't get it running with the EFI, I'll just stick a carburetor on it, put that intake manifold on it, put a distributor in it, and run it. That way I can just make sure that the motor's okay. And then we can get into the whole fuel injection thing. Sometimes a lot of this is time constraint stuff. If I, whatever I can get done the fastest I can get done because I only have a limited amount of dyno time. In your opinion, what would be the best way to tune dual dominators? Well, for me, the best way to do it would be to have Steve Brule do it. But you just have to start out. We start out with the idle circuit and it's easy, obviously, with an air fuel meter. We can start out with the idle circuit, and then we actually start doing short loads and find out what it needs. Is the jetting right? Is usually the things need quite a bit of jetting with a if you're running two dominators on a tunnel ram, obviously you usually have to jet it up because the signal is not nearly as strong. But on a single dominator, it's simple. It's the same thing as everything else. We adjust the idle circuit. We start taking a look at. First, I go with the jetting, and then if you have to, you can also play with the air bleeds. I've never tested an OE LS intake manifold. I really want to. There's a lot of good ones out there that the guys have done stuff to, and especially I'm mostly interested in testing the ported LS3 intake manifold because it would be nice to get some gains over the LS3 because as you've seen in the videos that I have up on the big LS3 intake test, it's hard to be better than the factory LS3 intake. Even the fast struggles to do anything over the LS3. A Buick 215, those are cool. Although I haven't ever dyno tested one of them. I have run a 283 small block. The guy, the owner of Westech, has one because he has it in one of his many cars that he has, and they actually ran it on the dyno. And the 283 is a good little motor, but it's kind of like the 289 Ford. They struggle to make a lot of power unless you do a lot of stuff to them. They really need cylinder head. The stock heads are fairly small ports. They don't flow a ton. We set the OptiSpark on an LT1. We can run it with a fast EFI system, and it'll take the signal from the OptiSpark. The differences in head choices for a 454 or 496, I don't think so, really. I mean, if you take a look at the airflow, at the testing that we did, I wouldn't hesitate at all to put a 265 Airflow Research oval port head on a 496 because we know it has the flow numbers to make the power. It'd also make good low speed power. It'd be a good torquey motor. So it more depends on what you're trying to do with the motor. If you're trying to max it out and do maximum power, then you would pick a different head than if you were trying to use it as a tow vehicle. 360 Magnum will be fine. Yeah, I think so too. I'm just excited about testing the beer keg on the Magnum. I think that'll be cool. I think 4 300ZX turbos would work good. Yeah, but it's just a lot of plumbing to get 4 turbos to work on something. I think you're better off if you go buy 4 turbos from a 300ZX in a wrecking yard. You're going to spend as much as you would on a single turbo, an aftermarket turbo like one of these GT45s that we use for stuff. You're going to spend that much money on a turbo that we know will make 800 horsepower. What engine are you running in the Nova? Right now, it doesn't have one. What the first one we're putting in is going to be the 292 inline 6-cylinder, and then with a turbo on it also. Solid roller, a 283 twin turbo, 8,500 RPM. Yeah, that's not something I'm interested in trying. 10,000 RPM. See, the high RPM NA stuff doesn't really excite me at all. It's just very, very expensive. And in my opinion, it's just so much easier to make power with boost or something, some kind of power adder rather than try to do that. And there are lots of guys that have done that. If you look at Ben over at the EFI University on what is it, Project Spinal Tap, they've got lots of RPM out of that. And he you know, it was like 2 or 3 years spending getting it to do that. So it's certainly possible, and it sounds really great, and I love that they've done it, but that's probably not something I'm going to look at. Most of the guys that I'm talking to and the stuff that I'm dealing with, the thing that I work on, most of them are all low buck junkyard kind of guys and not real high end stuff. I mean, I do that occasionally because we've done that stuff with the magazines, but not real high RPM NA stuff. It's possible to run too large of a CC intake port. Cylinder head, that big bore 4.8 at 13:1. Yeah, I think you can go too big on the head, because if you run 2 heads on it, like we ran on that 4.8 with the in the LS3 block, we put a rec port head on it, and it didn't really do anything. And it was a much bigger port than the cathedral port head that we ran on there. And it didn't really do anything. It didn't really add anything to the equation. So I think you probably can go you can go too big. Yep, Nova is Spanish for Nova. It means no go. We all the Nova people should should know that. Can you dyno a stock 2-valve 5.4? I've run lots of 4.6 stuff, and I've run 5.4 4-valve stuff, but I don't think I've ever run a 5.4 2-valve. What is high RPM? These guys are talking about 10,000, so apparently that's where it is. I think you can put Gen 5 and Gen 6 heads on Gen 4 stuff. I think there is interchangeability. It just has to do with the intake gasket. And you guys, big block guys, if you guys are out there, let me know if that's right. I'd have to talk with Brule about that, although I don't think he does a lot of Gen 5 and Gen 6 stuff. But I think that there is interchangeability, because I know that we put lots of aftermarket heads on the Gen 6 stuff. And unless they're doing something different to the head, you know, we'd have to look into that. 20,000 RPM. That's Formula. That's definitely Formula One territory, and that's beyond Formula One territory, because only in testing were they ever getting 20,000. Because when they limited them to 18,000, they were running them to 20,000 on the dyno. It has a 4.3 with a 267. Yeah, I talked about that in the video. The 267 and the 262 and the 265, all the different bores and strokes and stuff. The 2-valve plugs we never had problems with. The 3-valve stuff, guys had problems with the 3-valve spark plugs, but I've actually never had problems with any of the 2-valve Ford stuff with spark plugs, and we've run lots and lots of boost on that stuff. I don't think we'll gain anything by putting the fast on the LT1 compared to a factory system. As long as you can get the air, fuel, and timing right, I think that you'll get the same power theoretically, unless there's a spark problem, which I don't think that there should be. You can run different retainers on a 26-120 spring. You can do a plus or a minus retainer. You can also do a plus or minus keeper on that. The problem that you run into is that when you try to put that retainer on, the valve tip will be flush with the retainer, and then the roller tip wants to ride kind of partially, not just on the tip of the rocker, but it's also pushing on the keepers and the retainer, and that's not a good idea. I don't know about the 5.7 Volvo Penta. It depends on what year it is. If it's late enough, it probably would be a Vortec head. That's what I have in my boat in my Rhinell. It's not a 5.7, it's a 5.0, but it is a Vortec headed 305. In the Big Bang 5.3, did you ever sell or tell what all the build sheet had? Like all the specs plus, I'd be happy to tell you anything that you wanted on the 5.3. There's no secrets. And I went over the build. I mean, it was a stock bottom end. I told you what camshaft we put in it, and I told everybody what cylinder head and what intake manifold and what the turbo was. And I could tell you, if I look back on the thing, I could tell you, I think it had about 18 degrees of timing when we were running the 26 or 27 pounds of boost that we did on the 5.3. But we normally, and we didn't on the 5.3, and we should have, we didn't run ice water, but we normally do. Great 502. Yeah, and you can see I have the twin GT45 turbo stuff up there, and it works good on big blocks. Having two of them, it works a lot better than having one of them, because the big block is obviously too big for that little GT45 turbo. It makes good power, but it has a lot of back pressure just because the big block makes so much power. A 224, 232 crane cam does not need 11:1 compression. You can run any cam with any compression ratio. You can run it down at 7:1. You could run it at 15:1. The cam will still work with any compression. That's not accurate. Okay, guys, I got to get going. I got to head out down to West Tech. But thanks for joining the live chat. Thanks for taking a look at the big block stuff. I think it was awesome. I mean, we picked up on the big block, we picked up 58 horsepower with the head swap. Those Summit heads work good. Somebody let me know if you think it's a dart head or whatever it is. It's a good iron head. An iron head obviously is an option. Lots of guys, especially boat guys, that don't want to put aluminum heads on it because they don't want the, like electrolysis and stuff happening. They like to use iron heads because they're sturdy and they're strong, and they don't transfer all that heat away, and they make more power than aluminum heads, which is all of the theories that people have. But the Summit heads work good. They made lots of power. Thanks for watching, guys. Time to sign off, and I will see you next time, hopefully with some Cadillac dyno results. If I can learn how to sign off.